Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in session 1 dedicated to infrastructure and services connectivity. I invite the keynote speaker, Jan Dröge, to present his keynote speech.
Good morning and welcome to this first session. I'm honored to be invited to be here today to give this keynote on a very important topic of bringing connectivity to everyone. May I ask for the slides, please? Perfect. How to bring cutting-edge infrastructure to the Western Balkans. It's a challenge that is not specific to the Western Balkans. It's a challenge that I think most countries are facing. We all want to bring growth to our countries. We want to bring innovation. And nowadays, there is no innovation without ICT, and there is no ICT without connectivity. So how can we achieve these goals? That's what I will try to just cover in very short introduction speech before the panelists will address the issue. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the European Union has set pretty ambitious goals on what connectivity targets should be. So for 2020, the target was to bring 30 megabit to all citizens in the European Union. The next target would be by 2025 to bring 100 megabit upgradable to gigabit to everyone, and to have 5G coverage for all citizens. And by 2030, to have gigabit connection for all citizens and all businesses. These targets are quite ambitious. And in fact, we just missed the last one. The target of 2020 to bring 30 megabit to everyone, we didn't achieve. We didn't achieve it in the EU, and probably most other countries didn't achieve it either, and probably not in the Western Balkans either. So the question is, why are we setting even more ambitious targets for in 3 years' time when we just missed the past one? So could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, sorry, it's probably a little bit hard to see the slides, but I'll walk you through it. So, why set ambitious targets when de facto we know we might miss them? Why are we setting more ambitious targets for the next few years when we haven't even finished the last ones? I would say there are several reasons. First of all, if we continue with the targets of 2020 of bringing 30 megabits to all citizens, to all households, in fact, we're working on outdated technology. And the objective of enabling innovation, of enabling growth through connectivity will be missed. So the targets have to be adapted to the available technology, to the reality that we work under. But also, if you don't have an ambitious target, then where will the politics go? And I will try and now make the link between the political targets and what it means for bringing connectivity. Because indeed, in the EU, as in the Western Balkans, most of the investment in the telecom sector is done by the telecom operators. It's a competitive private market, and between 80 and 90% of the investments are carried out by private operators. So why are we worrying about this? Well, the reality is that, yes, 80 to 90% are carried out by the operators, but there's still a gap. As we just saw, we still missed some of the investments. So the question is there a role for governments to intervene, and what should that role be? And I'll try and address that in a second, but the first step is probably that the government needs to set its own ambition level. And this is what we call the national broadband, the national broadband plans. Each government in the EU has a national broadband plan, and most of the Western Balkans are developing them as well with the support of the World Bank, with the support of others. But there are now broadband plans nearly for all countries, each one with their own targets. So when you do that, the first thing to ask is, okay, what is our ambition level? And then what is the gap? Where are we and where do we need to go? Because you can't really then define a policy unless you know where the gap is. Sorry, there's a pop-up window regularly. So you can't decide unless you have the gap assessed. And then once you know, okay, this is where we are, this is where we want to go, then you can set your policy. But as I said, it is not an environment in which the governments can intervene irrespective of the operators, because, as I mentioned, 80 to 90% of the investment is done by operators. So any state intervention has to be done in a way that it encourages or stimulates or complements the private sector investment. It should not crowd out the private sector investment, because in fact then you might make the situation even worse. Yeah? And so once you've set the objective, once you've assessed the gap, then there's a need for dialogue with the market, with the operators, of where is there a need for intervention. And just to keep it very simple for this keynote, the interventions can be, and probably cannot see it because it's below here, but there might be regulatory gaps, there might be the regulatory environment on which the government can intervene and make investment and stimulation for the operators easier or more attractive. And secondly, there might still be areas where there's need for state aid intervention, so public investment, if I may put it like this. And I want to address that I will try. Perfect. In the next slide. So these are the statistics from Eurostat, so the European Statistics Office, on what we call the digital divide, the rural gap. Indeed, you can't see the legend because it's at the bottom there, but basically in yellow is those areas where we already have over 100 megabit connectivity. In gray is where we have over 30 megabit, and in dark blue is, I don't know if I have a pointer. No, oops, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. In dark blue is where there is not even 30 megabit yet. So you see on the left-hand side is the urban areas. So for the urban areas, you see it's pretty yellow. So most of the urban areas of Europe are actually covered with 100 megabit. But then if you look at the right-hand side, it's the rural areas. And you see there's only one country in the EU where more than 50% of citizens are connected to 100 megabit. That's Denmark. Every other country, even the ones that are always mentioned as good practices, in the Nordics, in the Baltics, etc., less than 50% of rural citizens have access to 100 megabit. And I'm not even yet talking about gigabit connection, which is our next target in 2030. Yeah? So there's a lot of work to do. And I'm afraid I only have the statistics for the 27 member states, but I fear that the statistics in the Western Balkans would not be significantly better. It's, of course, you're right, they're much better, but still there's probably a little bit of an investment need. So if we look then at a map of where these areas are, you can see that nearly always the need for investment is in the remote rural areas. It could be because they're island areas, it could be because they're in mountains, or because they're in areas of low population density, areas where maybe people leave the rural areas, and you see that a lot on the right-hand side in Romania and Bulgaria, but in other parts of Europe as well. In fact, you can't see it there on the map because it's low, but in Italy, there are a lot of areas that are still in this gray, so where the 30 megabit objectives are not yet reached. In fact, there's not a country where there's not still a gap. So the investment need is, if I may put it like this, universal. I don't think I want to give a recipe here today in this keynote on how this should be addressed. I think every government, every country has its own ecosystem, its own reality, and will need to assess individually what the gap is, what the levers are for intervention. But there are certainly some good practices, some lessons that we can learn from each other. And that's what I would like to conclude my session with. Because these lessons, that despite the intervention in many of these countries, the gap remains, is a fact, as you can see, in all member states. So the European Commission has asked the question, how can we address this? And in 2016, so already some years ago now, the idea was to create a network of broadband competence offices. So what does it mean? It means that in each member state, a point of contact should be designated to act as central point of contact in each member state where these challenges are being analyzed and solutions are being developed. No single administration can, of course, achieve that in any member state because it's a complex ecosystem. As I mentioned, you have the government actors and you have the private actors. But even on the government side, you have many players. And that's exactly the point of the broadband competence offices, is to bring these different opinions together, to act as a single point of contact, to bring the national broadband plans together and to help in the implementation of the roadmaps towards overcoming these investment gaps that we mentioned. So there is now a BCO in each member state of the EU. There are BCOs being created or actually already very active in all of the Western Balkans. And in fact, I'm honored because I was invited actually by the ministry in Kosovo who acts as the BCO here in Kosovo. And thank you very much for inviting me and for all the great work that you're doing. You're actually an active member, but from many of the other Western Balkans, we have active members in the network as well. The objective is, it sounds simple, but it isn't, to bring the knowledge around technical understanding, because we're talking about telecoms, so it's an engineering challenge. The financial aspects, because as I mentioned, we're talking about an investment gap. So if the private sector does not want to intervene, where's the money going to come from? So it's about public funding. So it's a financial aspect. And then there's a regulatory legal aspect, because it's electronic markets are highly regulated in the EU. State intervention has to follow certain rules and regulations. And in fact, there is very few administrations in the member states where all of these three sets of competence, the technology, the financial, and the regulatory legal aspects, are handled by one team. So our objective in the BCO network is to bring these actors together so that these three elements of intervention in the telecom markets can be exchanged, brought together. I don't think I will want to walk you through all of this, but maybe these are some of the core activities that the BCO networks work on. And maybe I will just want to mention here the top purple one, which is the mapping. Whenever a government wants to intervene in a telecom market, as I said, they need to understand where's actually the problem. What is the gap? Where do I need to intervene? And in many cases, it's not so easy to know where the gap is, because this is exactly where the service level and the engineering comes together. How can we map where the infrastructure actually is? And even if there is infrastructure, I don't know, cable going to village X, what is the service that the user actually gets? Yeah? And this is a mix between regulatory and technology in order to understand this. And it sounds simple to say these nice maps that I showed earlier, but to get these maps is actually a pretty high challenge, because most governments don't have clear transparency of where the infrastructure of the different operators is. And even if they know what the infrastructure is, what is the service level that that infrastructure delivers to the end users, be it businesses or citizens. And to actually do that mapping is, I would say, one of the building blocks, one of the cornerstones for good state intervention. So this is one of the key elements, and the several donors, together with the European Association of Regulatory Authorities, BEREC, are actually working on a Western Balkan common project on improving the mapping. I don't know if somebody from BEREC is in the room, but this is definitely a worthwhile exercise. So as I said, this is just one of the elements. There are many others. The other one, and in the Western Balkans this will be an increasing, growing challenge, is the issue of state aid. Once you know where the investment gap is or where the intervention need is, and if you know what is your political ambition and you have the public funding, how can you intervene in the market without distorting the market? How can you intervene and promote investment without discouraging private sector investment or without maybe favoring one operator over another? Yeah? And there are pretty strict rules on state aid intervention in the markets. And this is another element where the BCO network works about exchanging good practices and learning from each other on how these interventions can be made. As I mentioned, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution to any of this. I think every country has its own ecosystem, its own market dynamics, so this will have to be assessed case by case. But maybe I can just give as one example, because there has been a lot of lessons learned from each other in the last years that we've been working on this. And that is, yes, one thing is to invest into the infrastructure through state intervention, but the other one is to actually stimulate the demand. So this is a growing mechanism of intervention that we see, where the government subsidize through vouchers or other schemes the demand from the end users, businesses or households, so that there's an incentive for the operators to actually bring the service. And the other one, as I said, is to bring infrastructure to the remote underserviced areas. And I mean, there are many examples throughout the EU, but as we're here in Kosovo, this has just been done through something called the CODE project with support from the World Bank, which I think is a good example of how state intervention can bring connectivity to remote underserviced areas. So there are many more examples, and I hope we will explore some of them today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Dröge, for your speech. Now I present the moderator, Nicole Klingen, and the panelists, Minister Artane Rizvanolli, Minister Admirim Aliti, Minister Marash Dukaj, and Deputy Minister Enkelejda Muçaj.
Thank you very much, and good morning. So let me introduce myself. My name is Nicole Klingen. I'm the practice manager for the digital development practice, global practice at the World Bank. I cover Europe and Central Asia and the Middle East and North Africa. I've covered many other regions, and it's interesting, Jan, to hear from you this morning, and I'll get a little bit into this, but of course I'm so pleased to be here. It's a distinct privilege for me to be moderating this star-studded panel of a gender-balanced ministerial set of ministers, which is really nice to see. We don't always see that in the world, that we have a gender balance in this field, so it's really nice. I hope we can this morning, get lessons, go a little bit deeper into your experiences, your lessons, and your next plans on where you want to be. Digital. We're talking about infrastructure here and cutting edge, but Jan, you said it's very important to keep the bigger picture in mind. Why are we doing this? We're doing this for economies, to transform economies and countries, to make sure that all citizens, and there comes the inclusion aspect, all citizens get opportunities, are connected to the labor market. Services are being provided way more efficiently, transparently, and with a lot of accountability. And so I'm really interested in hearing from all the panelists and getting to the lessons learned. I will hopefully, so I will tell you, I'm half Italian, half Swiss. I will try to be very Swiss in managing the time so that we can really get also to questions from the audience. I know yesterday it was not always easy and possible, but I will try to do that. And in this case, I will now start with gentlemen first. And so we'll reverse this a little bit and ask Minister Aliti. Your country has rolled out early the 5G. How did you make that decision process? Jan was talking about bringing all the actors together in that decision process, making sure we don't crowd out the private sector, making sure we don't have too much of a rural-urban gap. And just a side note on that, that's very Europe. Rural and urban. In Latin America, there's a lot of peri-urban gap in connectivity. But here we're talking in your country. How did you go about it, and what lessons did you learn?
Thank you, Nicole, and hello, everyone. I think that for the rollout of 5G, which happened this year in North Macedonia, the key decisions were made in 2019, and this was before me being appointed minister, because I was appointed this year. Jan explained very well that it was the EU's recommendation for all Western Balkan countries to both approve a national broadband strategy and also to create a broadband competence office. And North Macedonia did well with both of them. So in 2019, I'm not sure if it was April or May, the government approved a national broadband strategy, which defined the phases of rolling out broadband fiber optics, but also we had a section for 5G. And parallelly with that, the Ministry of Information Society and Administration, which I lead now, has created a consulting body for the Broadband Competence Office, which is tasked in analyzing the situation of the infrastructure and tasked also with recommending the ministry which steps should be taken in order to reach the objectives. And as far as 5G is concerned, generally the plan was that by 2023 we cover at least one city with a 5G signal. By 2025, we also cover main highways of the country. By 2027, we have 5G in all the cities in North Macedonia, and last phase by 2029, every citizen should have access to 5G signal. So I think we are in good way in reaching the first phase, but of course we have to work a lot in reaching all other phases, because for instance this year we have started in Skopje, the telecom operators, but of course it was facilitated the process by the government and the regulator. Generally, I know we have here also representatives from telecoms. They are more interested, in highly populated areas. In North Macedonia, that would be Skopje. Same, I think, applies in Kosovo. It would be Pristina. But the government must find, ways and incentives to make it possible that we have 5G also in less populated areas, because as you well mentioned, the IT infrastructure is strictly also related to our economic prosperity, and from the point of view of the government, we would want to have prosperity in all the cities, and not only in urban areas, but also in rural areas. So some more history how we reached here. Last year, the government also approved an information directing the regulator that the regulator can open a tender for opening the spectrum for 5G. And of course, telecom operators had an interest in that. There were some, in the case of North Macedonia, only some bylaws needed to be changed in order that to be possible. And that was done by the regulator. Regulator is, like in most countries, an independent entity, but still it's our ministry that creates laws for them. So indirectly we are also, connected with the rollout of 5G, because all the information's in the government and so on. It was our ministry doing that. And the idea, in fact, was to start the rollout last year, but there were some, bureaucratic obstacles, and that's why it was postponed for this year. So I was appointed in January, and I know even in my first month in my job, we met the regulator and the telecom operators, and worked hard, all of us, to make it, to implement it as soon as possible. And this year, the tender by the regulator was open. They did a good research, and they analyzed how this procedure was done in most of EU countries, and they took some averages. And for the spectrum, were interested two main telcos in North Macedonia, which is Deutsche Telekom and the Austrian A1. And I don't want to go in details which spectrums each of them took, but they have started, and we are proud that now we can say that in North Macedonia, not in all Skopje yet, but I hope that in all Skopje we should have by the end of 2023. And of course, as a government, we are highly interested in continuing, the support to the market, and if necessary, legislative changes are important to do them in order to succeed. That by 2030, which is the objective of gigabit society that Jan mentioned from the European Union, we are highly interested as a country to reach that objective, given the fact that we as a country have recently also started the negotiation process with the EU, and another political objective of ours is to be a full member of the EU by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And obviously I failed my Swiss citizenship test on the timekeeping already. I might want to move to Italy at one point, my mother's country. No, it's fine. No, we're going to have to try to keep in 7 minutes each segment, so that we can also go to the. No. It was very interesting. Lots of lessons learned. Very ambitious plan as well. So I look forward to visiting Skopje very soon and testing, do a test ride on the 5G. Mr. Dukaj, in Montenegro, you also rolled out commercially quite early. Okay, this as one of the countries, and it would be good to hear from you a bit on the lessons learned, but I cannot ignore the issues around cybersecurity in the region, and also in your country. It must have been a very stressful time for you and the country and the government. And I would like, it would be great if you could share a little bit how you're handling the situation, and if you see any opportunities to have a collaboration, because I understand many countries are being attacked right now in the Western Balkans, and maybe there could be room for collaboration in that space.
Thank you so much. Evo, želim da vas pozdravim sve i ja ću se obratiti na albanskom jeziku zbog toga što većina ovaj skup se održava naravno u Prištini i želim da vas sve pozdravim i mogućnost da učestvujem u ovom veoma važnom skupu. Në fillim dëshiroj t'ju përshëndes të gjithëve dhe mundësinë për të marrë pjesë në këtë konferencë kaq të rëndësishme sa I takon çështjes së pyetjes se zonja e Beri keni qenë të informuar që kohëve të fundit Malizi pikrisht me datën 19 ngusht ka pas një atak të jashtëzakonshëm, një ramje të jashtëzakonshme në komplet infrastrukturën digjitale dhe jo vetëm, por në krejt në sistemin e informacionit në Maltëzi. Ne kemi punuar shumë në këtë drejtim një punë të jashtëzakonshme, një ndihmë të jashtëzakonshme ne ka ofruar partnerët tonë të NATO-s, gjithsesi Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës dhe Franca. Kohëve të fundit është angazhuar natyrisht edhe Britania e Madhe, gjithsesi Anglia. Ne kemi arritur, gjithsesi punonjësit tonë në administratën publike, në ministrinë që unë drejtoj, kemi arritur që të mbrojmë të dhënat personale, kemi arritur që të mbrojmë të gjitha informacionin që është i rëndësishëm për qytetarët tonë. Duhet potencoj që kohëve të fundit, apo në 7 vitet e fundit, 10 vitet e fundit, Malizi nuk ka bërë sa duhet sa i përket mbrojtjes kibernetike. Unë kam iniciuar ndryshimin e ligjit për mbrojtjen e informacioneve, sepse ende ne nuk kemi, për dallim nga Kosova, fjala vjen ose Shqipëria, që keni agjencinë për mbrojtje kibernetike. Ne ende në Maltëzi nuk e kemi agjencinë për mbrojtje kibernetike, dhe shpresoj se shumë shpejt këtë ta formojmë, si dhe shërbimin i cili është në mbrojtje të sistemit 24 orë. Sa i përket ramjes ose atakut, ne kemi konfirmuar që këtë ka bërë organizata kriminale, organizata e njohur kriminale, Kuba Rajnë Zomber. Kjo organizat dihet se me kënë mes së shumtit bashkëpunon, por agjencioni për mbrojtjen e të lënave do ta konfirmoj shumë shpejt. Këtë do të njoftohet opinioni, natyrisht opinioni i gjerë. Për ramjen në Maltëzi janë përdorur, janë krijuar nga kjo organizat 5 viruse zero dates, që asnjëherë më parë nuk janë përdorur në asnjë sistem, asnjë shtet tjetër. Sipas të lënave që ne i kemi, një virus i tillë në tregun e zi kushton nga 7 deri në 10 milion dollar. Andaj kjo tregon se sa e rëndësishme dhe sa e fuqishme ishte ramja e kësaj organizate terroriste digjitale. Jemi të vetëdijshëm se nuk kemi qenë mjaft përgatitur për këtë ramje, jo vetëm ne, po as Shqipëria, dhe shpresoj që shtetet që të gjitha së bashku të bashkëpunojmë dhe të shpërndajmë jo vetëm provojat, por edhe praktikat e ndryshme që të mbrohemi nga sulmet e ardhshme, sepse këto sulme me të ardhmen do të ndodhin edhe shumë më shpejt dhe më shpesh. Faleminderit.
Thank you very much, and thanks for being so open about it. It's not easy, and it will happen again maybe, but it's good to be protected and to have really good security systems built in, because it's, as you said, it's not if you will be attacked, but when the attack will happen. And so many systems in the world are being attacked all the time. There are these very interesting websites where you can see live attacks happening. And protection will be important, because the more the economy depends on digital and on the infrastructure, we need to make sure that we protect. But I wanted to ask Minister Rizvanolli and Deputy Minister Muçaj if you wanted to come in this segment of, the rollout of more 5G. We'll talk about the very good success of Kosovo and the last village that was connected. But in this kind of, if you have any views or any reactions or any lessons that you would like to share in this segment, we will come in the next segment in a minute to the broadband.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be in front of this wonderful audience and this very distinguished panel. For Albania, the 5G argument had already started since several years already. There is a roadmap, by the way, already drafted by the World Bank And there is a process, actually, which also has been figured out and, let's say, treated by a memorandum of understanding, which, in which Western Balkans, as we are speaking about the regional, let's say, cooperation, has already dictated and, let's say, advised and took commitments, obviously, but setting some objectives as to what, let's say, the steps would be ahead. And as a matter of fact, Albania is already carrying out a series of technical activities. I would like to be very short with regard to that, in implementing the MOU, dating back November 2020, and freeing up its, let's say, the DD2, or let's say 700 megahertz, let's say, band, which is, let's say, instrumental for the implementation of 5G. And although, let's say, there's been a test on IG since the year 2019 by the Vodafone Albania in Albania over, let's say, the 3.4, 3.6 gigahertz, let's say, area. There is these pioneer bands which are already, let's say, available, but not used. So there's been a decision, there's been a spectrum policy for which we are very intensively in the last 2 years, and we have already even had the concordance, if we may say so, of the countries which are in order to have an interference-free operation. Just lately, by our media, let's say, audiovisual media agency, in order to, let's say, set up and have a final, let's say, spectrum and let's say, allotment for, let's say, for the reallocation, let's say, of the spectrum for the 5G in the country. But what I wanted to pick up from the, let's say, adversities and the problems on the 5G, because we are going on with that. There is a process. We hope to have a launch of the process in 2023, but obviously the advent of the cyber attacks in Albania did not remain untackled. It appears that we have been under that process since 14 months already. I mean, we had that annotation, that strong annotation in July of this year, but let's say the attempt has been started since May of 2021 as per the Microsoft's, or let's say operators, I mean specialized operators reports. So what we would like to emphasize, dear friends and colleagues, is that we would like to really now have a very structured way ahead with regard to even the 5G operation and especially the security environment, let's say, around it. And I'm picking up perhaps the most EU, let's say, based and relative argument on the security, which is the 5G toolbox mechanism, which is already part of our new legislation, a new law on electronic communications, which is serving on one hand, let's say, the very high capacity network, let's say, investments in the country, but on the other side, will be used in order to tackle very attentively the issue of the security on the 5G networks too. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, colleagues. A real pleasure to have you here. We do appreciate you being here and sharing your experiences, Ministers Dukaj and Aliti and Deputy Minister Muçaj. I think from what we've heard so far, I think there are a few lessons learned certainly from Kosovo, and I'll talk about what we are doing really well and what we have done really well. But first I'll talk about what we can learn from you. In terms of 5G technology, what Minister Aliti said about having a rollout plan, about the way you did it, first focusing on a city, kind of piloting, and then highway. This is actually something. This is actually something that we can learn from, and we are approaching it in a similar way, though we are not as advanced in implementing it. What we are planning is piloting it in ITP center in Prizren. But I should say in the private sector and private university, UBT has already piloted 5G and using it to a limited extent in academia, but we hope that also expands too. And another important lesson I think that we have all been reminded of, and that resonates with what the Minister and Deputy Minister from Albania and Montenegro were saying, is that we should not forget that when we are talking about infrastructure, when we are talking especially about advanced technologies like 5G or in the future Internet of Things, we are really talking about national security. And we should not be too quick in advancing infrastructure and providing the services unless we are prepared for it, and I think, or as prepared as one can be, because obviously there is no perfectly safe way to do this. However, the benefits outweigh the costs, and a matter of striking that balance between knowing and being able which data should be more protected or not being having access to outside networks at all is a very important one from a policy perspective, I think. However, I think these are the lessons that we can learn, and in this respect I'd also like to add that as, in the 5G area, one step that we've made in preparing for this is having the National Spectrum Monitoring System, which we inaugurated a few days ago, the latest technology, which in itself, of course, is not sufficient. However, it's a precondition to have safe and advanced technologies rolled out in the future. And also our national regulator, ARCEP, is preparing the call for allocating frequencies for 5G network. However, and this is something related to something that Jan mentioned in his opening speech, readiness of providers here is key, and having competition and making sure that you are not distorting the market is key here. So this is where that cooperation between private and public sector, but also that risk of either crowding out investment or distorting the market significantly comes in. And I think this is also an area where we have success already in the broadband that I will talk about later, but this certainly resonates with what you have been saying earlier. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and it's really nice how you drew out the lessons from this first segment of this panel. I want to also come back to something that, Jan, you said. The demand side needs to be prepared, right? We cannot just supply technology at people. We need to have a demand. That brings me back to the trust environment. If people don't trust the systems because they think their data will disappear somewhere, they won't use it. And so it's really an ecosystem of demand and supply can be complicated with all the market distortions that can happen, especially in this market. But let me come to the next segment where we're going to talk now fiber optic and fiber optic broadband. So you had an enormous success. You've achieved something in Kosovo that not many countries in the world have achieved. And this is to me, it's just absolutely fantastic achievement that you have done. So you have connected last month the last village in Kosovo to broadband. And to me, that is something that is quite unheard of. And most countries, from the very rich to the not so rich, struggle with this. They have not achieved that, and I loved the map that Jan showed. And of course, my country is grayed out because it's not part of this, of the EU. But my other country, Italy, is not doing very well. And the country I've lived in the United States, I've lived in for now almost 30 years. I'm still living there. Also would have a lot of white spaces. Let me put it like this. How did you do this?
With your help, obviously. But I think this is actually an extremely important question, and one that is very striking to me personally as an economist, but also as a policymaker. On the one hand, when we talk about infrastructure projects, we talk about it in very abstract terms, and we think about advanced technology and what it means for the private sector and private sector development and the economy, which is all great. However, what we sometimes forget is that this is so much more than just about the economy. This is about the society. This is about the equality and equity. And this is something that we as governments must always think about. This has become very clear During the pandemic, for instance, the ability to have access to learning and learning materials, or the quality of access and being able to participate in school actually depended on the level of infrastructure and ICT equipment that the children had at home. And this showed in many countries, in Kosovo too, I'm happy to say to a lesser extent, showed a great divide that was not so visible in normal conditions. So this is one thing to think about, and also making sure that people are aware when using technology, being aware of how much they want to share and how, and actually being protected. The other issue that is more interesting to me as an economist, and this is something that Jan was also talking about in his speech, and also your question is related to, is how do you make it happen? And how do you make it happen in a way that crowds in and does not crowd out private investment? And how does it happen in a way that we don't distort the market? So here actually why our initiative has been so successful, and thanks also to the support of the World Bank, and I take this opportunity to thank everyone who has worked on the project, including the department and the World Bank team, is that the way it was done was through competitive matching grants to support private sector to invest in rural areas where simply there was not enough demand to make it economically feasible. And this is great. However, in order for it to work, it has several preconditions. We cannot, if we want to look at it as a success story, and if we want to replicate it in other countries or in other contexts, like in 5G, we need to be aware of what made it a success. And in my opinion, as an economist here, it is the fact that, one, we had identified the areas in which there was not sufficient demand to make it economically feasible. Two, competitive matching grants to incentivize investment. Three, a sufficient number of ISP providers, and this is key here. This actually brought not only the success in terms of coverage, but the team managed to do this in a way that saved, I'm looking at you for a figure here, but I think about 50%, or this was done at about 50% of the cost that it was initially planned. So now, with the remaining funding, we are going to connect, and we have already started connecting additional public institutions, schools, healthcare institutions, etc., in those municipalities. And this is great success, I will say, and one that we are trying to replicate next with readiness for 5G technology. We have started and will continue with grants, financial support for mobile network operators for the connection of mobile network towers with fixed broadband infrastructure, which is a prerequisite for the development of next generation 5G networks. And this is where that part I talked about earlier, about the operators being ready for it in order to ensure that there is competition, and in order to ensure that we are not irreversibly distorting the market comes to play. And this is one of the issues that we need to work on harder together with the operators over the next weeks and months to overcome.
Thank you so much, and the success is all yours. We just helped a little bit along the way and were there. But this is all your team's making and you're making, and it's a really brilliant success. And I look forward to come back and see all schools connected and children learning and learning differently, and so that they get better human capital outcomes, and learning poverty can really decrease. So that's going to be fantastic. Albania. Deputy Minister, You're the only non-landlocked country. I'm not sure how I should say that, but you're not landlocked on this panel. And so you have submarine connectivity. So one is and you know, these days everybody worries about redundancy and having enough of the broadband connectivity, but you also have, you know, infrastructure sharing with your energy utilities, and you're planning to expand that. So two questions around that. What are the lessons learned really from the infrastructure sharing with the energy utilities, electricity utilities, and also, are you planning to do more international connectivity through the submarine cables and then into more regional connectivity so that many countries can, you know, share that wonderful infrastructure that comes internationally? Because today international connectivity has become quite difficult and not necessarily very stable, and many countries have to think of what you, I think yesterday, called the plan B and the plan C and the plan D. I call it redundancy, but to make sure that since the economy does depend now a lot on digital, and we saw that in the pandemic, that if there is a conflict anywhere in the world, that the economy still can keep going.
Thank you very much, really, for the question. And actually, I would like to pick up from what the esteemed Minister of Economy of Kosovo just mentioned about struggling and trying to provide broadband infrastructure services to the wide areas, and obviously trying to, first of all, make a mapping, a very clear, I mean, to have a clear understanding of what exactly is the status right now of the infrastructure, let's say, broadband infrastructure investments in the country, which in Albania, due to the transmission system and electrical systems already construed, but also taking into consideration the fact that since 2016, the government of Albania has a very clear objective to construct, develop high capacity and now very high capacity broadband infrastructure networks, and trying to fill the gap, because obviously, as we are taking the time, precious time with operators in this meeting, we would like to point out that the government of Albania will be trying to fill the gap or create a situation for the mobile operators and the private sector in our country in order to then try to operate and be, let's say, find it feasible to operate in the so-called wide areas. As a matter of fact, in the region level, we have a fiber optic share with, let's say, Republic of Kosovo, Montenegro, and North Macedonia, and Greece, and would like very much, and our TSO, let's say, our transmission system operator, has been involved in this regional, and we have been there putting our call, let's say, with regard to what could be the cooperation between the countries who have, or let's say the TSOs of the countries who would like to or wish to be interconnected and connected and share fiber optic and capacities amongst each other. To say the truth, the international, let's say, support on the broadband infrastructure regionally in the country, but also, let's say, on the cross-border level, needs to go to the level of understanding of all the parties involved for the right support for Albania. And is not just a support to have a needs assessment of where exactly we need to intervene. Okay? I mean, identify where the private mobile operators are. They're already there, and identify which could be the support on the backbone level, or let's say in the other levels of the networks that the Albanian government should invest in order to support then the services, the ISPs and others. Obviously, there is an initiative that we already proclamated, which is the digitalization of the, let's say, governmental services in the Republic of Albania. It has been already proclaimed, discussed, as one of those initiatives which has intensively involved all the services, almost all the services. 95% of the services almost approximately are offered online. But as you just mentioned, and righteously mentioned, what has happened lately, and on the lessons learned, even via the interconnectivity and trying to use our alternatives or energy systems, gas, wood and sewage systems, because obviously under our perspective, our legislation, there is a very clear understanding that all those systems represent systems in which you might invest, and you should, not might, but should invest passive infrastructure for the operators then, in order to offer the capacities to the government or the private sector. This is what a public entity should do in order to help, let's say, the development of the country as such. So what we are trying to do and what we would like to envisage especially with the, let's say, with the projects with the World Bank, which we'll really look forward to go on, and the WBAF projects that we have for the white areas, to have a much more, let's say, not only economy oriented, which is also important, but also social oriented, let's say, investment and security oriented issue. For us, it is already, having all the services online and providing that sort of transparency facility, to all the subjects in one, let's say, portal, in one infrastructure, and being, let's say, under attack, or understanding the, let's say, the gravity that the world, or let's say the interconnectivity and connectivity in the digital area may have. There are a lot of problems to be faced. We would really like to see these projects to really provide some support also on the level of the security that we have to take and bear in mind in each step of the way that we are going to do, even trying to exploit all those regional and our capacities, which are, we are very happy to announce many, but we would like to coordinate them in order to provide the real sustainability. So in case that one of the systems gets attacked, you would have the redundancy plan. You would have the other systems backing up and providing and exchanging, let's say, the possibility and supporting our services, either for the private but especially for the governmental services, which is a public, let's say, interest in the country. Hoping to not have been very long in this, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. It's really interesting to hear you also say that the services should be for the citizens, right? It's for, digital services. We're not doing this infrastructure just because we love infrastructure. But because we want, services for the citizens and opportunities for the citizens. For me, it's all about, so I'm also an economist, it's all about economic opportunities for citizens and leaving nobody behind. Not one single citizen in a country. But I'm going to go back to the gentleman. We do this in a very gender equality, equal area. So, ministers, would you like to add anything to what we've heard now on the broadband? And then I will promise I will come to the audience.
Thank you, Nicole. Of course, when it comes to fiber optics, I think it's good to congratulate Kosovo and Minister Rizvanolli. I think they have done a great job. And I think, all of us, of other Western Balkan countries can learn, from how they implemented it in Kosovo. Because first, you mentioned earlier the case of US and Europe, and I think in Europe it's very good that, we have this paradigm that we must cover all our countries with fiber optics or with high-speed internet, because we saw also in the time of COVID that we need a lot of learning platforms and a lot of other platforms that connect people, and in the future with the artificial intelligence and virtual reality and so on, this paradigm in Europe that every citizen should be able to access ultra-fast internet, I think is the right concept. And that's why we as Western Balkan countries must embrace this concept and learn from each other. I think, it's natural that private companies and telecoms, I don't know a country where they have, covered all the country with fiber optics with their own initiative, because I think it doesn't have, economic sense. But here, I think it comes at play the role of the government and, find different ways and workarounds how to, have this cooperation with telecom operators and make it happen like they did it in Kosovo. Just briefly, for North Macedonia, in recent years we had several attempts to roll out fiber optics, but there was this different positions. On one position first was that the government should fund all the projects. The other position was that telecom operators should do it in some form of PPP. What we are doing this year is that we have again restarted the process, and this year we intend to complete a feasibility study which will make the situation clearer to us, and then decide in 2023 we start with implementation of fiber optics in all the country. And our intention is also that our ministry has cooperation with the Ministry of Economy in Kosovo, which was in charge of implementing it here, because I think we have a lot to learn from them on how to do it in North Macedonia.
Edhe unë shumë shkurt edhe herë të falenderojmë qeverisë së Kosovës dhe gjithë organizatorëve për këtë organizim kaq të rëndësishëm, dhe duhet të them se Malizi si shtet antar i NATO-s dhe si lider në këtë rajon për integrimin e Bashkimit Evropian e ka të qartë se digitalizimi është një proces i cili duhet të realizohet sa më parë, sepse kushton shumë dhe duhet të jetë në shërbim të qytetarëve, sepse qytetarëve kjo natyrisht edhe i kushton edhe ekonomisë. Po ashtu duhet potencoj se Malizi sa i takon rrjetit 5G nga 23 komuna deri tani rrjeti 5G është i shtrirë në 19 komuna dhe shpresojmë që shumë shpejt deri ka mesi i vitit tjetër do të jetë i shtrirë edhe në komunat tjera. Vlerësoj se bashkëpunimi rajonal dhe me azjer, përvojat e ndryshme na ndihmojnë të bindemi çdo ditë më shumë se mbrojtja kibernetike, nga sulmet kibernetike do të jetë çdo ditë edhe më e ashpër, dhe këtu mendoj se duhet të fokusohemi me së shumti. Edhe në fund dua shumë të kërkoj ndjes, e kam njoftuar ministrin, kolegen, se kam takim me kryetarin e komunës, me kryetarin e kuvendit të Kosovës, dhe duhet të jap një mesazh se forumet apo takimet e këtilla të nivelit ministror më shumë duhet të japin mesazhe politike sesa mesazhe profesionale. Ne me vete në ekipet tona i kemi njerëzit profesionistë dhe shpresoj që natyrisht edhe në takimet, në forumet në vazhdim do të shpërndajnë edhe më shumë informacione dhe në këtë mënyrë të krijohet bashkëpunim. Ne jemi këtu në nivele të larta që t'i mbështesim ata. Faleminderit.
Thank you very much. The translation was a bit slower than your speaking. Thank you very much. Do we have time for the audience for questions? Yes, Natalia says yes. My boss says yes. How much time do we have approximately? 10 minutes. Questions. So this is your opportunity to ask any questions. I know Minister Dukaj will have to leave to Parliament soon, but and we'll just let him go and wish him all the best for the meeting. Any questions? This is your chance. I don't know how we're going to be organized. Thank you so much. I don't know how we're going to be organized, if there are roaming microphones or so. That's, I'm now a little bit lost. There is a question back there. You can raise your hand, you can stand up. We are not in a virtual meeting, so you can't raise your virtual hand or send any other signals. But yes, over to you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Dorotina from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and I have a question for Minister Rizvanolli. Should I ask in Albanian or? Ministra, më falë, dje gjatë konferencës dje në summitin digjitale përmendet që në disa fshatra në veri të Kosovës nuk ka shtrirje për shkak mungesës bashkëpunimit me autoritetet lokale. Deshta me të pyet se kur ka qenë tentimi i fundit, çu do këtë tema keni propozuar një projektin edhe çu planifikoni me zgjidh këtë problem të ardhmen. Faleminderit.
I will collect a couple of questions. Don't be shy. Going once? Going twice? No other questions? There you go. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I am Vedat Morina from Telcos and a private ISP. We are offering internet services and television. I want to ask our minister, can it be possible to remove the procedures bureaucracy when we want to put an optic cable under the ground? For example, near to the roads, we have to ask the Ministry of Infrastructure. Years before, I make many requests and I have to wait for a year, and it's take too much time. It's impossible to work and it's hard, but almost, as you know, we put our cables on the poles, but it's more safety to put the cables under the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I hope not all the questions will be for the minister from Kosovo. And you distribute the questions a bit nicely, Natalia.
Thank you very much. I have a question to our keynote speaker, Jan Dröge. Now that you have heard all that, how, if you could reflect, on what do you think the lessons are learned from the EU countries? Because I know that you are aware probably about all the state aid projects over there, and I think it would be very relevant, if you could reflect on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Other questions for our, yes, the audience is warming up.
Yes, greetings to all. I am from company Vista. We are the implementing partner of the Ministry of Economy. Actually, we are the company that covered the last village that you mentioned previously from the white areas. We have one question for the entire panel, I guess. It's that we are working with cutting-edge cables, microducts, and what are the chances of unifying this technology? Because we are ministry has required other types of ducts, and we are implementing more modern. So, are there any plans of unifying this?
Thank you very much. Other questions? I'm going to take two more questions. Yes, in the back.
Good morning. I'm Jan Dröge. I'm expert in digital transformation. Thank you all for your excellent panel. I would like to ask, especially this question is for North Macedonia Minister and Albania. Do you have, but also for Kosovo, do you have any joint projects that you're working together in the field of broadband or any other subfield in technology? And if not, do you plan to do any project together, for example, in the framework of IPA or other European Union regional cooperation and other European Union funds? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. Other questions? I'm always looking at the gentleman lifting his microphone up, but I should try to see who is. No more question? I'm going to say going once, going twice. No? Okay, the gavel is down. I think the first set of questions was really for you, and maybe also with the ducts and the modernization. Jan, I will come last to you for a round of reflections, and then so maybe we go this way. Is that a good idea? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for all the questions. I think they are very, very valuable. In fact, we should have a separate event only for Kosovo to address these questions and to identify both problems and bottlenecks, but also ideas for joint projects or any other activities. Having said that, there are, with regard to Dorotina's question, as I said yesterday, also in the north of in the northern municipalities of the country, there have been many villages that are covered. If there are others that are not covered, all they need to do is come to us. We are also willing to initiate another round of discussions at political level with mayors of the municipalities or the companies if needed in order to make this happen. As I said yesterday, we as government of Kosovo are committed to providing in an equal manner access to infrastructure and other services for all citizens of Republic of Kosovo, regardless of where they live and what nationality background they are. With regard to your question, Vedat, on cables and Ministry of Infrastructure, related to Ministry of Infrastructure permits. One area in which, and this is actually, I would say it's more complex, even more complex than that, than the single permit, but actually the planning and installation to be done in a way that requires less cost and that enables companies to share infrastructure, which reduces the cost for consumers, but also streamlines the process. And this will take, as you know, we've passed the law last year on broadband, the long one, which I forget the name of, but broadband cost reduction, the short version. The real name is about 3 paragraphs long. But anyway, what matters is actually implementing that. And in the budget for next year, we have planned the single point of information, which is the first step in implementing this. That will enable us to know where all providers, and this is not only for ISPs, this is actually also very much related to electricity distribution company cables, for instance. And these, we know that we have problems all over Kosovo and in our own neighborhoods with these costly, but also work that is done in a way that affects the lives of citizens every day. And this takes, this is easier said than done, which is why it hasn't been done so far, because it takes very close cooperation, not only the hardware of it, but actually very close cooperation and coordination between municipalities and relevant ministries like Ministry of Infrastructure, Ministry of Economy, and this is something that we are going to embark on very soon, and hope that all these procedures will be streamlined, and I think it will really affect the quality of life for citizens in many ways, apart from reducing the cost of providing services, which is the, shall we say, the initial and first aim of this law. With regard to the ducts, I'm just going to say that this is one of the issues that I think merits a further discussion for the future between us. And Riyad's question on cooperation. So far, the main, I would say, ideas or initiatives for cooperation, for regional cooperation in this area for Republic of Kosovo anyway, are two projects with Republic of Albania. One of them is digital highway. So Pristina to Tirana highway, having a 5G corridor in this area. We've had it I think we're planning to include it in our budget. However, we need to coordinate with further coordination with Albania to ensure that we do it in a coordinated manner at the same time. And another new idea, which we are cooperating on with Ministry of Infrastructure, is a feasibility study for optical cables to be developed in the line, tracea, of the future transmission. And possibly also in the railway between Durrës and Pristina in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Minister Rizvanolli answered my questions too. You know, for the cables, I understand the perspective from scientific point of view, but when it comes to North Macedonia, we are too early for that. And as Minister Rizvanolli said, usually when it comes to standards, we prefer, you know, to include, to have this inclusive process where we have public discussions and see which is better. And if it's feasible, of course, you know, economically for the country. Of course, given the fact that when investing in fiber optics, we expect that investment to last 30 years. I think we should be, you know, careful on what cables we put on the ground. And of course, it's our desire to put the best cables, but I can speculate what we will do in North Macedonia, because at the moment we are in a process of creating terms of reference for the feasibility study. And afterwards, you know, it will be for us the phase where we decide what kind of standards we will be having for the cables. And as for the question the gentleman at the back asked, you know, I know that we as a countries have different joint IPA projects, but in other ministries, you know, we have these cross-border joint initiatives. I know for a fact we as North Macedonia have it with Kosovo, have it with Serbia, and so on. But when it comes in digitalization, I think it's, you know, it's good that we as Western Balkan countries are in many forums together, like this one, because, you know, good discussion is the foundation of any cooperation we should have. But you are right, I think in digitalization we should think to have more joint projects, because when we do joint projects, I think the discussion goes even deeper, and it's a chance for us to learn from each other more and to benefit from each other's practice. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much once again. I would like to to add perhaps to what the esteemed ministers just said, that the joint, or let's say the regional program, which has already focused the TSOs or transmission system operators, could be a perfect start in order to bring up a strategy, a coordinated, integrated strategy which puts in line and in layers all those infrastructures which in all countries can serve as let's say, as lying beds for passive infrastructure in digitalization. And one of the lessons, let's say, learned for Albania has been since year 2016 that all the, let's say, operators or let's say investors which are investing in infrastructures such as telecommunications, it's just like that, but let's say in energy, gas, water and sewage, and also the energy transmission system should, as a matter of their own operation, first of all, because normally the digitalization is a part of their own operational scheme, but especially in order to diversify, perhaps, their portfolio and to provide capacities, either in passive or active, as the case may be. And I'm bringing the Albanian case. Let's say the OST is one of the operators who has been very active in this, let's say, Balkan digital highway. We are very interested, OST has been very interested in order to discuss with the partner, with the countries such as North Macedonia. I'm picking up from the question that the gentleman has made. And that study that we are going to undertake, but also the investments, because the OST has already commercialized its fiber optic, and with a view of setting up this regional wholesale broadband market, because what we perhaps should be discussing in the upcoming months, possibly, is to really make it happen. So start from and using and stemming from the energy transmission systems, seeing their capacities, and perhaps, and for your information, OST has already 2,100 kilometers of optic fiber, for the optic ground wire infrastructure already in place in the country, and is planning to, let's say, increase the equipment and the access ports in its own system, but also it's ready to go across border with the other entities via an investment. The latest one that we're implementing, Your Excellency, is the 400 kilovolt interconnection system between Elbasan, district of Elbasan, and Bitola in North Macedonia. So one of the capacities that already is provided is there. In there is also the, let's say, the fiber optic and, let's say, digital infrastructure capacity for its own, but also in order to provide it to telecom operators, as the case may be, on the backbone level, or for other capacities, for data, etc. So even creating a division within the let's say, this company, state-owned company, in order to provide the services and, let's say, digitalization services to the public, private sector, as the need may be, already commercialized. This service for OST in Albania is already in the market, and there are already contracts entered with Cash, with Kurum, and with other private operators on the backbone in order to exchange or back up their systems, taking into consideration that OST has, let's say, 83% coverage of the Albanian territory as such. So going cross-border for us through our systems remains a priority, as it has already been declared to the World Bank. So we would like to really bring it farther and faster, possibly, but faster with keeping the right pace on the security and all the requirements in order to have the safe interconnection and exchange between our systems. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Jan, I wanted to come to you, but there is a two-hander, I think, over there. I'm not sure if I should allow the two-hander, but I will, you know.
Thank you.
Do we still have enough time?
Yes, we have a couple of minutes for Jan then to conclude. I just wanted to respond really to this regional question which came, which is a very good question, you know, indeed. And as the minister from Albania have mentioned, and also Mr. Rizvanolli has mentioned, and, you know, all of them, there is this initiative, Balkan Digital Highway, which was, you know, not moving as fast as we would have wanted, you know, in collaboration of all electricity transmission grid. We're working with COST, we're working with MEPSIS, North Macedonia, with OST in Albania, and we're working with CGAS in Montenegro to bring their fiber together for the benefit of the operators to strengthen interconnectivity between the countries, that maybe we don't speak too much about that, and also connectivity of the region internationally to plug in Western Balkans more strongly into the international backbones, which is very much needed indeed. And this initiative is about that. So I think that ministers have displayed very well, but I think it's important to say from our side as well, because we try to play an active role in this, and we think it's a great example of collaboration with those companies. Unfortunately, they are not here because also electricity transmission grids, but still they do good job in that field as well. Thank you. And trying to keep it short. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before I hand over to Jan, I'm going to have you kind of reflect. And I was reflecting myself, you know, as a lot of, and you said it before, collaboration is needed across the different ministries and the municipalities and the communities. It's not easy. Otherwise, it would have already been done. And even with us, and I wonder, you know, in the World Bank, we're also siloed, like ministers, right? So like departments, and you have different departments, but we have excellent collaboration with our energy colleagues here, and I really want to thank them, because without that collaboration, it doesn't work. And we tend to not collaborate, but it's good to have more fora for deeper collaboration. Jan, lessons.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and I'm honored again to be here and be allowed to conclude this excellent panel. And thank you for all the speakers and your great inputs. It's hard to capture all of what was discussed in a short while, so I'll try and do it in a structured way. If we're talking about connectivity, you can look at the supply side and the demand side. And as I mentioned earlier, there is, so to say, the regulatory aspect in order to promote this, and the actual investment aspect. So I'll try and structure to capture all of these elements that were discussed today in these elements. If we look at the demand side, I think it became clear from the different discussions that trust is fundamental. If the users do not have the trust, whether they're businesses or whether they're citizens, if they don't have the trust, they won't use the infrastructure. If they don't use the infrastructure, there's no demand, then the private sector won't invest. So I think the trust, the cybersecurity, and I think you mentioned the cybersecurity toolbox, it's one of the building blocks and response mechanisms. There are many more that are necessary, but I think this is definitely response number one, make the environment as secure as possible, and I think this was very well addressed by the panelists. The other, of course, is digital skills. This was only touched upon very little, but it was a big part of the discussions of day one of the conference, so I hope many of you saw it. There were great examples from several countries, but notably from Kosovo. And there is, of course, an initiative by the EU on EU Digital Skills Platform. If any of you don't know it, check it out, EU Digital Skills Platform. It's a cross-EU initiative because, again, if users don't have the skills to use the infrastructure, there won't be demand. And again, if there's no demand, there won't be investment. So there's a lot happening on, if I may say, soft investments that are fundamental in order to create the right environment. Then, of course, even on the demand side, you can invest. And this is, as we've seen examples in Italy, in Greece, but other countries are looking at this as well now, is can we stimulate demand by giving vouchers, so a small subsidy to households or to businesses to bring their first connection, to basically help them overcome the reluctancy to make a first connection. And then the idea is that once they're in, once they appreciate the increased service that you get from a better connectivity, that they will continue paying with their own funding. But so to say, stimulation to bring demand. And again, the idea is if this demand is stimulated, it will motivate the private sector to actually make the investment, which would save the public sector to have to actually invest into infrastructure. So this is on the demand side, and there's already a lot that can be done. And as we heard, the governments of the Western Balkans are already very active. Then on the supply side, again, we can look at the soft measures, the regulatory aspects, and the actual hard investment into infrastructure. Because again, if the regulatory environment is right, the propensity of the private sector to invest will be higher. And we heard it from a couple of the questions from the audience. And I'm very happy that the Minister Rizvanolli mentioned the Broadband Cost Reduction Directive, because indeed, the investment into fiber is one of the highest in terms of the upfront investment. Because of the digging, the actual cable is a fraction of the cost of the deployment. The cost is in the works and, as you mentioned, in the long lead time to get the permits. And this is not a Kosovo challenge, this is a challenge in all the countries in Europe. So I just want to make this clear, which is why there's the suggestion for the implementation of the Broadband Cost Reduction Directive. How can we streamline permitting? Because this lead time is a challenge in all countries. But it's very difficult for any government, be it in Kosovo, in Germany, in Belgium, or in France, because generally it's not the responsibility of the national ministry to do the permits, but it's the responsibility of the municipality, of the region, etc., of the canton, depending on your national setup. So it's very difficult for government to actually regulate this. So this is why you need soft measures to streamline these elements, which is not to say we shouldn't do it. On the contrary, as you mentioned in your question, this is a key hurdle, so we need to address it. But we also have to be realistic about what we can expect the government to do. The government can sometimes only put oil in the mechanism, but the mechanism needs many other players to come together. There are other elements, of course, also on the supply side, on the regulatory aspect. And I think you mentioned quite rightly the wholesale market. Again, by creating the right regulatory environment for different operators to benefit from the infrastructure investment that already took place, of course, you will bring more operators into the market, create competition, as Nicole mentioned at the beginning, and thereby stimulate more investment from different players. And then finally, of course, there's the investment itself. I won't go back into the investment that different governments are doing. I think both ministers explained very well what's happening in Kosovo, what is being planned in North Macedonia. But I would like to come back maybe just as one example, because the question was on the cross-border projects, and I think they were mentioned. And maybe I can complement to that, because just a few days ago, I was actually in Nicole's seat moderating a panel on a new EU funding scheme, because you mentioned specifically how can we bring cross-border investments leveraging EU funds. There's a new program called Connected Europe Facility, which has a Connected Europe Facility digital budget, which is specifically has an investment into what they call global gateways, which is notably on submarine cable investments. So I don't know, I don't want to prejudge, but let's say you wanted a cable Albania, Italy, or something like this. This would be falling under this. But also for the gigabit highways, the ones that Natalia mentioned. In our session with the European Commission on Tuesday, this was specifically mentioned, this Trans-Balkan, if I may call it like this, digital highway or backbone infrastructure for broadband, would potentially, I mean, it's not for me to judge, it's the Commission makes the evaluation, of course, for projects, but this is the type of project that would be eligible under this new CEF funding. So to bring critical cross-border infrastructure between the EU and neighboring countries. So there's still a lot that can be done, and as you see, the investments can be both on the demand and the supply side, on the soft measures, where our government's already very active, but actually also on the state intervention.